The merciless Ouagadougou sun beat down upon the dusty training ground as Marcus Chun gave a final adjustment to his pristine black belt. His expensive athletic wear stood in sharp contrast against the modest community center surroundings. The scent of red earth and acacia trees mingled with his imported cologne while he surveyed the gathering crowd with barely concealed disdain. Word had traveled fast through the neighborhoods. A three-time international champion was here to show the locals what real martial arts looked like. His eyes swept dismissively over the children in worn clothes and the elderly men seeking sparse shade. This, he thought, would be easier than anticipated. "Where I come from, we don't play games," Marcus announced in heavily accented French, his voice carrying the weight of countless tournament victories. The crowd murmured uncertainly as he unleashed a series of lightning-fast kicks that sliced through the humid air. Each movement was precise, calculated, every technique honed through years of expensive training in world-class dojos. He had come to Africa expecting easy opponents and impressive footage for his social media channels. The local youth watched with a mixture of awe and quiet resentment as his display continued. His kicks could shatter boards, his punches could break bricks, and his confidence could fill stadiums. A restless shift moved through the gathering as Marcus's demonstration grew more elaborate and his comments more condescending. "Your traditional fighting means nothing against modern technique," he declared, striking poses that had won him magazine covers back home. An old woman selling mangoes nearby shook her head knowingly, muttering prayers and more that seemed to drift upon the wind. The community center's cracked concrete walls had witnessed many gatherings, but never one charged with such tension. Marcus's prominently displayed equipment bag, filled with medals and trophies that gleamed like promises of inevitable victory, sat nearby. He was here to prove that imported excellence always conquered local tradition. The crowd's murmur suddenly stilled as a figure approached from the shaded entrance of the community center. Marcus barely glanced up from adjusting his hand wraps, assuming another curious spectator had arrived to witness his superiority. The afternoon heat seemed to intensify as footsteps echoed steadily across the concrete. A voice from the crowd whispered a name that made several people straighten with surprise and respect. Marcus finally looked up, expecting to see another amateur challenger he could dispatch quickly for his highlight reel. But something in the sudden stillness of the gathering suggested this moment would be different from anything his training had prepared him for. Ibrahim Traoré stepped into the circle with the quiet confidence of a man who had faced challenges far greater than a martial arts demonstration. His simple military fatigues bore the dust of countless meetings with village elders and late nights spent strategizing for his country's future. The crowd's energy shifted palpably as they recognized the young leader who had captured their nation's hopes and dreams. Marcus looked up from his stretching routine, noting the newcomer's unremarkable appearance with a dismissive smirk. There were no flashy uniforms, no intimidating muscle mass, just a lean figure whose eyes held a depth the champion couldn't yet fathom. Whispers of "Captain" and "Our son" drifted through the spectators on the afternoon breeze. "I hear you're looking for a real challenge," Ibrahim said quietly in perfect French, his voice carrying none of the bravado Marcus expected from local competitors. The martial arts champion sized up his new opponent, cataloging what he saw as obvious disadvantages. No visible training scars, no fighter's build, no expensive gear. Marcus's confidence swelled. This would be even easier than anticipated, the perfect finale for his African documentary. Ibrahim's hands remained relaxed at his sides, showing none of the defensive postures Marcus had studied in countless opponents. The crowd began to press closer, sensing something significant was about to unfold. Even the children stopped their restless movement, instinctively understanding they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered. Marcus stood and cracked his knuckles theatrically, his championship rings catching the harsh sunlight like warnings of impending defeat. "You sure you want to do this, friend?" he asked with practiced condescension, already mentally composing the social media caption for his inevitable victory video. Ibrahim simply nodded, stepping fully into the makeshift ring with movements that seemed ordinary, yet somehow commanded respect. The gathered Burkinabe citizens formed a wider circle, their faces reflecting a mixture of concern and quiet anticipation. An elderly man clutched his prayer beads tighter, whispering ancestral invocations that had protected warriors for generations. The very air seemed to thicken with expectation as two vastly different worlds prepared to collide. The champion began his pre-fight ritual, shadowboxing with a fluid precision that had intimidated opponents across 3 continents. His movements were poetry written in violence, each strike a testament to years of dedicated training and natural talent. Ibrahim watched quietly, his expression revealing neither fear nor excitement, just the steady focus of someone accustomed to facing overwhelming odds. The crowd's murmur grew softer, as if they were witnessing something sacred rather than merely sporting. Marcus finished his display with a spinning kick that whistled through the air mere inches from Ibrahim's face. But the young leader didn't flinch, and in that moment of absolute stillness, something shifted in the champion's confidence for the first time. Marcus exploded into action with the speed and precision that had made him legendary in fighting circuits across 4 continents. His opening combination was a blur of calculated violence, a feint with his left hand followed by a devastating roundhouse kick aimed directly at Ibrahim's head. The technique was flawless, honed through thousands of hours of practice and perfected in championship rings where hesitation meant defeat. The crowd gasped as the kick connected with Ibrahim's cheek with a sickening crack that echoed across the training ground. Ibrahim stumbled backward, blood trickling from his split lip as Marcus landed in his signature victory stance. The champion raised his arms triumphantly, certain the fight was already over before it had truly begun. "Stay down, friend," Marcus called out with mock concern, his voice carrying the arrogance of someone who had never met an opponent he couldn't break. The gathered spectators watched in stunned silence as their young leader touched his bleeding lip with surprising calm. Marcus began his victory lap around the circle, his expensive shoes kicking up dust as he soaked in what he assumed was the crowd's awe. His phone was already recording, capturing what he believed would be another highlight for his growing collection of international conquests. The elderly woman selling mangoes shook her head sadly, muttering prayers that seemed to drift on the hot afternoon breeze. Marcus's grin widened as he prepared to help his defeated opponent to his feet with theatrical magnanimity. But something was wrong. Ibrahim wasn't staying down as every other opponent had done after absorbing such a devastating blow. Instead, he was slowly straightening, wiping the blood from his mouth with the back of his hand like a man who had endured far worse. The crowd's silence deepened, taking on a quality that made Marcus's celebration falter slightly around the edges. Ibrahim's eyes, rather than showing the glazed confusion of a concussed fighter, remained clear and focused with an intensity that seemed to burn. The young leader's posture didn't suggest defeat, but rather the quiet determination of someone just beginning to fight. Marcus's smile wavered as he realized his perfect technique had failed to achieve its intended psychological effect. The champion's confusion grew as he watched Ibrahim roll his shoulders and adjust his stance with movements that somehow seemed more dangerous than before. This wasn't the reaction of a defeated amateur. This was the response of someone who had been tested by forces far more formidable than martial arts tournaments. The blood on Ibrahim's lip caught the sunlight like war paint as he looked directly into Marcus's eyes with unwavering calm. The crowd began to shift restlessly, their initial shock transforming into something that made the champion's skin prickle with unexpected unease. Marcus had landed his best shot, his most reliable fight-ending technique. Yet his opponent stood before him, appearing somehow stronger than before. For the first time in his championship career, Marcus realized his training might not have prepared him for what was about to happen next. Ibrahim wiped the blood from his lip and looked at it with the same calm he had shown when facing down foreign mercenaries threatening his nation's sovereignty. The pain was nothing compared to the weight of leading a revolution. Nothing compared to sleepless nights planning his country's liberation from colonial puppeteers. He straightened fully, his movements carrying the quiet authority of someone who had stared down generals twice his age and foreign ambassadors with centuries of imperial arrogance. The crowd sensed the shift immediately. This wasn't a man who had been defeated by a single blow, no matter how skillfully delivered. Marcus's triumphant grin began to fade as he realized he wasn't facing an ordinary opponent seeking personal glory. This was a man who fought for something far greater than trophies or social media fame. "You hit hard," Ibrahim said quietly, his voice carrying no anger, no fear, only the steady acknowledgement of someone assessing a new challenge. The blood continued to trickle from his split lip, but his stance remained relaxed, almost casual, like a farmer who had paused his work to deal with a minor inconvenience. Marcus felt his confidence waver as he studied Ibrahim's expression. There was no pain there, no intimidation, only the patient focus of someone who had faced down coup attempts and international pressure. The champion's expensive training had taught him to read opponents, to identify the moment when their spirit broke and victory became inevitable. But Ibrahim's eyes held the same unwavering determination that had carried him through military academies and revolutionary planning sessions. Marcus was beginning to realize he had stepped into something beyond his understanding. The afternoon sun seemed to intensify as Ibrahim took a small step forward. His movement carried none of the flashy aggression Marcus expected from fighters seeking revenge. Instead, there was something almost meditative about his approach, like a man who had learned patience through years of careful planning and strategic thinking. The crowd's energy shifted palpably, their initial shock transforming into something that made Marcus's championship instinct scream warnings he couldn't yet interpret. Ibrahim's bleeding lip curved into the faintest smile. Not mockery, but the quiet confidence of someone who had discovered his opponent's limitations. Marcus found himself backing up slightly, his body responding to threats his mind couldn't yet comprehend. The young leader's presence seemed to fill the circle with an authority that had nothing to do with physical prowess. The champion realized with growing alarm that his perfect kick, the technique that had ended dozens of professional fights, had accomplished nothing more than revealing his own limitations. Ibrahim stood before him like a man who had been tested by forces that made martial arts competitions seem like children's games. The blood on his face served only to highlight the calm determination in his eyes, the same look he wore when addressing the United Nations about African sovereignty. Marcus's expensive equipment and years of training suddenly felt inadequate against whatever internal strength his opponent was drawing upon. The crowd began to lean forward collectively, sensing they were about to witness something that transcended sport and entered the realm of legend. For the first time in his championship career, Marcus understood he was facing someone who simply could not be broken by conventional means. The taste of blood in Ibrahim's mouth transported him instantly to his childhood village where his grandfather, Mamadou, sat beneath the ancient baobab tree. A warrior's strength comes not from his fists, but from his reason for fighting, the old man had said, his weathered hands carving patterns in the red earth. Young Ibrahim had listened intently as Mamadou spoke of ancestors who had resisted slave raiders with nothing but determination and unity.